Welcome back to Seafood Day in the Environment and Transportation Committee. Our first bill up this afternoon is HB 19 by our colleague Delegate Morgan. Delegate Morgan, take it away.
Thank you, Chairman Cord, Vice Chairman, and all the illustrious members of the ENT Committee. Remember that this is the best committee and the most fun committee that we will have. And let's remember, we have just preceded this discussion by a thing called the blue catfish. So today I bring before you a bill with the intent is to provide a response to the other invasive species we have around here called the northern snakehead. As you can see, that pretty little picture there. The snakehead, unfortunately, is one of those large threats to the bay, native aquatic life in not only the bay, but to the rivers. And the aggressive nature of the fish and its adaptability to provide a variety of environment has raised concerns from environmental experts and local watermen. The bill named today is called the Patuxent fish. However, please believe me, I am not wedded to the name of the Patuxent fish. And as if you watch the Senate testimony, a suggestion was made to have it the Bailey fish. You could have fried Bailey, sauteed Bailey, etc. Nor am I proposing the name become sauteed Morgan, although that midwood ends up with me here today. The reason the name was originally named the Patuxent fish is because it's probably the only self-contained river in Maryland. It touches Anne Arundel, Calvert, Charles, Howard, Montgomery, Prince George, and St. Mary's County. However, the crux of the problem today is we have a PR problem. Watermen want to catch the fish, restaurants want to sell the fish, environmental experts want the fish gone. Now, this was supposed to work. There we go. The problem here is there is a lack of interest in consuming the fish. However, over time, we have seen that fish names have been changed to enhance their marketability. The slimehead had its name changed in the 80s to the orange roughy. It's now popular in many places. Before the change in the name, the mahi-mahi was known as a dolphin fish. Restaurants changed it to a Hawaiian name to assure diners that they're eating dolphin fish. And other names include the Patagonia toothfish is better known as Chilean chili bass. Maryland striped bass is known as rockfish, and goosefish is more called monkfish. So now we take a look at these pictures. How many of you remember Mikey? Would Mikey eat the fish on the left? Because Mikey eats everything. I think Mikey might pass. So the idea here is we want that fish on your plate. Everyone, with the exception of the chair, has had the opportunity to have fresh snakehead bites. We had it last year. We had the snakehead and we had the blue catfish. So the idea here is that instead of having to look like the lady on my left, we want the guy on the right, the happy couple down there to enjoying their new fish. And you aren't going to do it without changing their name, because I don't think anyone here will go to a restaurant and raise their hand and say, I want snakefish, please. So we have some people here behind me, and there's been a lot of deliberation on this for what's that name going to be. And I know that once I put that bill in, that name is gone, and this committee has a lot to think about. So the name that has been bantered about through agriculture up to the governor's office is going to be called Chesapeake Chana. Chesapeake to reflect the bay, Chana to reflect its native name, recognizing this is an exotic fish. And we want to make it so that people want to go to a restaurant and pay good money for exotic fish. Watermen are happy, restaurants are happy, people are happy. So with all that said, I really wish to have a favorable report on House Bill 19, because this is the best and fun committee you have. Questions? Or I'm sure there's people who want to testify too, because they like my idea.
Yeah, you have a virtual favorable witness, so we'll see if there's any questions for the sponsor first. Don't see any delegates, so we do have appearing virtually Shelby Watson Hampton in support of your bill.
Good afternoon, Chair and esteemed members of the committee. I'm happy to be here. Shelby Watson Hampton from the Southern Maryland Agricultural Development Commission, which is a division of the Tri-County Council of Southern Maryland. We are in support of HB 19, renaming of the Northern Snakehead, entered by Delegate Morgan, as it is SMATIC's mission to increase the overall economic viability of local products. We find this bill to be important to the success of local fishermen and to the local waterways. The proposed change is intended to address the challenges created by the invasive snakehead fish. Scientists, environmentalists, fishermen, and watermen are all in strong agreement that the fish is wreaking havoc on the ecosystem of our local waterways and need to be removed as much as possible. One way of ensuring removal is to make the fish, which has a delicious white flaky meat that is enjoyable to eat, more appealing to consumers. Therefore, this bill seeks to encourage consumer consumption of the snakehead by giving it a new name that will look delectable on local menus. Using a more enticing name, chefs, restaurants, and stores can better advertise and promote the product. While we enter testimony supporting the name of the Patuxent fish, we heartily support the name change to the Chesapeake Chana, or whatever the committee decides to do, anything that is more appealing than the current snakehead. So altering the common name of the fish, as we have shown, has become a proven and successful way to encourage harvest and consumption. So renaming the snakehead to the name chosen will make it more marketable and will have substantial benefits for our watermen, our economy, and our ecosystem. Therefore, we ask that you support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Okay, I do not see any. So Delegate Morgan, thank you. We'll now transition to favorable with amendment testimony. We have Rachel Jones, the Maryland Department of Agriculture. Is she here? Come on up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. So Rachel Jones, Director of Government Relations for the Maryland Department of Agriculture. Secretary Addix couldn't be here today. He would like me to mention to you that his uncle, Joe Gillespie, caught the very first northern snakehead about 20 years ago in Crofton, and he would support the name Joe Fish. I'm supposed to say that for you. So HB 19 would alter the name of the northern snakehead. The Maryland Department of Agriculture markets Maryland seafood products. As it's already been mentioned in the sponsor's testimony, name changes for various fish have made them more marketable and more palatable to consumers over the past, several decades. And so what we've noticed is that the name Northern Snakehead makes the fish a little bit more difficult to market, as it's already been said. So we've got processors, grocers, retailers, and restaurants who are referring to the northern snakehead in their current marketing as the Chesapeake Chana, which is its scientific name. And in addition to the Patuxent River, the fish can also be found in numerous tributaries of the bay, such as the Susquehanna. And so for that reason, MDA supports the renaming of the fish, but ideally would prefer that it be something other than the Patuxent fish, something that would be more appropriate. And so with an amendment for a different name like the Chesapeake Chana, the Maryland Department of Agriculture would be glad to support this bill, and we would ask for a favorable report.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the Department of Agriculture? I do not see any. So thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you, Delegate Morgan.
Thank you.
Colleagues, we will now move on to HB 130, which is a departmental bill from the Department of General Services. Is there a representative from the Department of General Services here? I think they're on their way in the door. House Bill 130, departmental request from Department of General Services. Just a reminder, the department, because you're like the sponsor, is untimed, but please act responsibly with that.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Atif Chaudhry, Secretary of the Maryland Department of General Services. It's a pleasure to be here before you today in support, offering our support of Senate Bill House Bill 130. This bill incorporates into statute the goal of Governor Moore's 2023 executive order entitled Leading by Example in State Government. The bill helps to harmonize state buildings with the state's climate goals and reinforces and expands on requirements within the Climate Solutions Now Act. The bill amends and updates current statute to include energy saving goals and greenhouse gas mandates. These include an increase in energy savings for state-owned buildings from 10% in 2029 to increasing it to 20% by 2031. A revision of the high-performance green building program to align it with the state's climate goals. It directs DGS to expand the energy performance contracting program, which is a great program that allows us to implement energy saving measures that are at little to no cost over time, and ensures DGS provides oversight on progress, conducts annual audits, and maintains data and reporting requirements. It also directs all units of state government to implement projects and initiatives to conserve energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. As a support agency for the state, delivering not only expertise, but also essential services and facility operations and management to the state, DGS is well positioned to oversee the transition of state facilities to a more sustainable model. As we've already seen a 21% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in state facilities since the year 2018. We thank you for consideration of House Bill 130, and we look forward to a favorable report. Now we'll hand it over to David St. Jean, the DGS Director of Energy and Sustainability.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is David St. Jean. I'm the DGS Director of the Office of Energy and Sustainability. This bill focuses solely on state government operations as it looks to reduce the state's energy use and the carbon footprint of all existing state-owned buildings while providing support for one of our most powerful tools, energy performance contracting. Energy performance contracts are energy projects that are paid for through financial savings and have been used by Maryland state government since the 1990s. Maryland state government was one of the first entities to adopt energy performance contracts. And they deliver currently about $25 million in annual savings and 112,000 tons annually of abated carbon dioxide emissions. We need tools such as the Energy Performance Contracting Program and support such as directing agencies to focus on achieving the state's climate goals from the administration and the legislature for state government to successfully lead by example as we engage in the very real work of achieving the state's ambitious climate goals. House Bill 130 provides direction, a benchmark, and authority to motivate agencies toward those goals. As we maintain and repair our existing facilities and as we design our new ones, project managers at DGS and elsewhere and designers alike will look towards legislation such as this to guide their decisions. We encourage a favorable report and are available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have questions for the department? Do not see any questions, so thank you both for making it over from the Senate. We do have some other favorable in-person testimony from Jennifer Laszlo-Mizrahi and Mariana Rosales, if they're here. Please come forward. Please. Jennifer, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair and Committee, my name is Jennifer Laszlo-Mizrahi, and I have the pleasure of representing philanthropy on the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. I also live in Annapolis, where we in our neighborhood have been flooded 3 times in the last 6 weeks. Thanks to you, all of you, who passed the most ambitious climate goals in our country. It's just tremendous, the work that Maryland is doing, that we're #1 in our goals. However, as you all know, implementation can be very hard. For example, Maryland published a fantastic pathways report on our progress on climate goals. However, the report had a major problem. Every chart and graph was based on the assumption that all the terrific policies that you passed into law were implemented perfectly and on time. But as you know, that never happens. In reaching our state climate goals, we need to plan our work and work our plan. Things that get measured get done. Moreover, the state can set a great example for every other sector. This bill will align the practice of our state government with our own state goals. It builds on solid climate work being done at other levels of government. For example, at the federal level, the Government Services Administration has offered a toolkit, which I linked to in my written testimony. And countries in Europe, Canada, and other places are using services from companies such as Greenly, Persona V, and Watershed to help measure progress on their environmental impact. We can and should hold our own state government accountable as well. This bill will help us do that. I urge you to please support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of House Bill 130. For the record, my name is Mariana Rosales, and I am the Director of Climate for the Nature Conservancy in its Maryland and DC chapter. In case some of you don't know TNC, we are a global environmental organization. We work in over 70 countries and in all 50 states of the US. We own and manage the largest network of private conservation lands in the US. And as such, we believe in the power of leading by example. TNC considers that HB 130 will allow the Maryland state government to do just that, to lead by example by updating the set of tools that we have to reduce emissions from government buildings in accordance with the state ambitious goals. Why is this important? The building sector is one of the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions here in Maryland. The Climate Solutions Now Act, as Jennifer was mentioning, it's an amazing pathway. It gives us a set of objectives that we have to cut emissions over the next 2 decades. And that is great, but we need more than words. We need to implement them. We appreciate the effort of all agencies and all stakeholders that came together to define these goals, but we need to walk the talk. There's just too much to do and too little time. HB 130 allows a better alignment between the requirements and the desired outcome. By approving this bill, you give the state the chance to lead by example, to act in consequence, setting high building electrification standards in its own house. For these reasons, we urge a favorable report on HB 130. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not see any questions, so thank you to these witnesses, and that ends the bill hearing on House Bill 130. We will now turn to House Bill 245, another departmental request, this one from the Maryland Department of Environment. Bring up the department. Good to see you, Madam Secretary.
Okay, good afternoon. It's good to see you again. Excuse me, Chair Corman and Vice Chair Boyce and other members of the committee. What a beautiful day today. So I want to first just start by saying thank you for this opportunity to speak today about a very important issue, and that is how do we adequately fund the Maryland Department of the Environment? Governor Moore has made some real improvements in his budget, in his first budget, to increase our staffing, particularly when you look at it from an enforcement perspective. But we want to make sure that other areas of funding are also addressed so that we can continue to provide the services that ensures that Marylanders have clean, healthy, vibrant land, air, and water. So today I want to talk specifically about fees, penalties, and regulations. In short, we are just not charging enough or sufficient fees for the programs and the services that we're providing. And so instead of us having a self-sufficient operation that is funded from the service that we provide, we have to struggle every single year to make ends meet simply because we do not charge enough fees so that we can administer the programs. And with our budget situation that we all know so very well now, we just cannot no longer afford to have taxpayers funding programs that can be offset simply by charging and collecting fees. For more than a decade, it has been so clear to MDE that we need fee adjustments, and we've outlined those in the bill that you have in front of you. So now more than ever, we really need to have a focus on bringing our programs up to par. And we also need to make sure that the responsible parties pay their fair share. We cannot continue to place a burden on Maryland's general fund for fee-based services. It is also important for me to highlight that this bill will generate $9 million in revenue, and this will dramatically reduce our reliance on general funds, and it establishes a baseline for us going forward that we can live with. I know firsthand of the critical work that is required of this department to regulate pollution. And it is a really tough job to do when you don't have sufficient resources to do it. And I just want to give just a couple of examples of what I mean by that. One example relates to dams. There are a lot of private dams in Maryland, and they need to be replaced. But private dam owners, they sometimes don't have the disposable income to repair them. Some of them don't even realize they own a dam, which is really interesting. And so imagine if they're in a situation where they realize, hey, I have a dam, or they know they have one. It needs to be repaired. It's a lot of money. They don't have the money. When we're not collecting fees, we can't help them. We can't assist them. And then what happens is we are now at risk of failure of that dam, where lives are threatened as well. And so we need to make sure that we have enough fees collected so that we can assist, so that we, continue to help those owners. The missions fees for our Title V program under the Clean Air Act, they're underfunded as well. We need to eliminate, we have a $2 million deficit in fiscal year 2024. And the only way we can do that to reduce that deficit is by increasing the admission fees from $50 per ton to $200 per ton. Our wetlands and waterway fees, they've been inadequate for years. They haven't even been adjusted for inflation for more than a decade now. And despite the fact that we haven't increased those fees, we have gotten so many double permit applications coming in. And then finally, we have to continue the fight against lead poisoning. We have to protect our children because they're the ones who are far too often victims of this major issue. No child should have to deal with this terrible ailment. So right now, with all the additional requirements that we have from the federal government, from CDC, the levels have been lowered. The workload we have now in just that program is twofold. We can't even survive in the program anymore. We just don't have enough resources to get the work done. And so what we're asking for that program is an additional $30 per year in the registration fee so that we can run the program. And that's about $2.50 per month. That's what we're asking for. That's what we need. I want to echo what Governor Moore has said about prioritizing customer service. When our teams are understaffed and overworked, it makes it that much harder for us to respond to the demands of Marylanders. When sometimes it's just a permit holder who's just looking for a quick turnaround, or it's a community wanting to feel safe, particularly when we think about climate change and climate resiliency. And I know that the revenue that we can generate from this bill is what we need to turn that around as well. Throughout the past year, I've met with stakeholders on all these issues that concern them about MDE, about our services, about the impact on them, on their businesses, on their lives, and I have heard a lot. And this bill, I wanted you all to know that the bill we have that we put in front of you, it was developed working with those stakeholders. So we have all of their concerns in mind, and that's what you're going to see come through the bill as well. And then the last thing I want to mention is when I first started The first thing I heard was how bad MDE is in terms of our services, our turnaround time, permits take too long, enforcement is not where it should be. Permits are delayed. And so I came in and I took a real hard, deep dive look into the services of MDE. What I learned very quickly after all the analysis and the study was done was we didn't have enough money to run the program. Not only that, we had insufficient amount of people in the agency. We were forced not to hire. We didn't have enough people to do the work. When people left, they couldn't backfill. And again, the programs were underfunded. So with this bill that we have in front of you, if we can increase the fees as we've outlined, we can get this agency back to providing the services that we need to provide and that Marylanders expect from us. And now I'm going to turn it over to our Government Relations Director, Les Knapp, and he's going to walk through the details of the bill.
Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, good afternoon. I'm Les Knapp, representing the Maryland Department of the Environment, here in support of House Bill 245. We do have some additional amendments that we're offering, and these are attached at the end of our written testimony. I want to start by proactively addressing 4 questions that you might have. First, how did MDE decide what fees or programs needed adjusting? When looking at areas to adjust or create fees, we followed 4 guiding principles. First, environmental programmatic sustainability. That is, where are our programs challenged in meeting environmental protection requirements or providing acceptable customer service? Second, budgetary and fiscal sustainability. So which of our programs were running deficits, particularly those that required backfilling from the general funds? Third, responsible party pays. Where are people receiving a service or benefit from the department, or where have they created a problem or issue that we have to address? And finally, 4, economic growth and leave no one behind. What are the impacts of the fee changes on the economy, the regulated community, and underserved and overburdened communities? Second, what is the fiscal impact of the bill? This bill will have a total annual fiscal impact of about $12.1 million between both new revenues and budgetary shortfalls that will be prevented. There will be an annual total of $3.5 million in general fund savings for FY 2025. Third, what does this bill do? This bill makes a fee or program adjustments across all 3 of MDE's policy administrations, water, air, and land. Attached to our testimony of the bill is a summary that walks through each change made by the bill, why that change is necessary, and the fiscal impact of that change. I will just very quickly highlight the main changes proposed by the bill. For water, it authorizes MDE to charge a well or septic permit application fee where MDE is directly running that program. 2, it establishes a fee for a responsible personnel training program that allows us to update and maintain that training. 3, it updates our wetlands and waterways application fees based on CPI. And 4, it establishes 2 fees connected to dams, with the revenue from those fees going into a new fund to offer loans for private dam repairs. For air, in response to federal direction, we are increasing our air emission permit fees to a level where the fees can sustain the program. And finally, for land, it changes the oil transfer fee to 9 cents per barrel and clarifies when that fee is charged. It alters the application fee for the voluntary cleanup program to allow for full cost recovery. It increases licensing, renewal, and permit fees for non-coal surface mines. It alters how the coal combustion byproduct fee is assessed in order to avoid that program's funding going to zero. And it increases a rental property lead registration fee from $30 to $60 a year and specifies that the fee is now paid every other year. Fourth and finally, what did MDE do for stakeholder outreach? We conducted an extensive stakeholder outreach to proactively address as many concerns as possible, and we believe that this is reflected in the testimony you've received by the committee and the stakeholders that have opted not to take a position on this bill. Specifically with respect to some of the amendment statements that are being made, we've reached agreement on amendments with the county health officers and county environmental health directors, the Maryland builders, and on amendments that have been proposed. And we're confident that we'll be able to resolve an issue raised by NIOP regarding the dam portion of our bill. Finally, we've minimized the fee impacts on small businesses, and that's reflected in the bill's fiscal note. In conclusion, we believe that this bill reflects a careful and thoughtful approach to the challenges discussed by the Secretary. And this bill will allow MDE to better protect the environment and the health of our residents, provide better customer service to the regulated community, and not impede economic growth and business. So accordingly, would request a favorable with amendments report on House Bill 245. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have some questions. Delegate Teresa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just checking because I noticed I'm trying to figure out what page it was. On page, actually, I don't know which page it was, but I noticed that you're still waiving, or stream restoration projects are still exempt from fees. Is that something you've taken a look at, especially given our conversations about more monitoring of those?
So, well, wetlands and restorations permits cover a wide variety of projects. Stream restoration is included in there. And I think our Director of Water and Science can specifically address how those projects are charged or not.
Yeah, we did not change the charging structure in terms of how stream restoration would be treated any differently. What we did was we looked at our current fees and then we just adjusted them based on they haven't been raised in more than a decade, and we adjusted them based on the consumer price index.
Would you
My
mind
apologies for
identifying
the-
yourself just for your thousands
Yeah.
of fans at home?
My apologies for that. Yes, this is, thank you. This is Lee Curry, Director of the Water and Science Administration at the Department of the Environment.
So are those exempt, are stream restoration projects exempt from fees? No?
Let me just check, verify that and
Okay.
get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
I remember a conversation coming up, but I don't want to give you the wrong answer.
Okay, I
So I'll follow
appreciate it.
back
Thank
up,
you.
sure.
Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a big bill to read, and I appreciate the presentation that Les and Gabby came into the office and gave me to really give me a heads up on this. But, you know, I do have a particular interest in dams, and I'm trying to understand in this bill, because it does address the dam safety program. It doesn't seem to be a defined fee schedule in there. I can see in one part of it where it talks about approximately $618,000 annual revenue, but I'm looking on page 4 of the fiscal note. I just don't see a breakdown of fees, you know, and I have a particular interest in a few of them, especially when it talks about MDE conducts inspections based on hazard classes of dams, evaluates downstream hazard conditions. What's that mean?
So I think I can answer both of your questions sort of together. And there are two fees being proposed in this bill. One is a new fee that's a dam registration fee. And that registers for any registered dam in the state. And not every dam legally is classified as a dam that needs to be registered and subject to these laws. But for those that do, you would have a registration fee based on the hazard level of the dam. And there's low, significant, and high. And those are determined based on the risk to human life and property if that dam were to fail or be breached. We are proposing to make these changes to the fees in regulation. So that is why you don't see them in the fiscal note, but we can say for low hazard dams, we're looking to charge $200, significant hazard dams, $500, and high hazard dams would be $1,000. For the second fee of this, that would be creating a fee for an existing permit that you need when you come in to repair, modify, or construct a dam. that it would then be based on the estimated construction costs. And this is a model that's similar to those in neighboring states. So for the first $500,000 of a project, the fee would be about 3% of the estimated costs. For the next 500,000, it would be 2%. For the next 4 million, 0.5%. And for a project cost in excess of 50 million, which is going to be admittedly very rare in the state, it would be a fee of 0.10%. With those monies would go into a new fund that would offer low interest or no interest loans to private dam owners to pay the fees. And these fees would be collected from any non-federally owned dam. So state dams would pay into this, local government owned dams would pay into this, and private dams would pay into this.
I appreciate that. So can you just briefly touch on what evaluates downstream hazard conditions means?
Sure. Well, we have the three categories that Les was talking about. When we look at a high hazard dam, the way we evaluate that is we look at downstream. If that dam was to fail, would there be loss of life? And that's what puts it into a high hazard category. A medium hazard or a significant hazard category means would there be a likely loss of property? And then there's also a definition of what defines a dam. There are 557 dams in Maryland. We look at a variety of conditions that define a dam. One is how much land behind that dam actually drains to that dam and that reservoir behind it itself. Two, how big is the reservoir? Three, how tall is that dam itself? And then four, we look downstream to determine who would be impacted if it did fail.
So this is more about catastrophic failure than it is like storm event failure or storm event conditions downstream.
Yes,
is that what you're
yes,
saying?
yes. When we look at hazard classification, it's based on a catastrophic failure and the
Good enough.
impacts of that.
That's good enough. I just wanted to understand it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Delegate Healy.
Here we go. And thank you for this bill. Years ago, when I was on the Ways and Means Committee, one of my jobs was to bird dog all these fees and make sure there was language in them that the fees were supposed to be set to cover the costs of the services. I think, and we had that language inserted in a lot of those fees. As you probably did the research on these, you found that paragraph, and that was my work. One of the other disciplines that we tried to do was to say that we did not want these fees to create pots of money that were just sitting there not doing anything. So we use it or lose it kind of thing. If you don't spend the money, it goes back to the general fund. And is that in this bill? Is that over those policies? Is that written into this bill?
So they're not written into this bill because that's already established case law and statute, but they're absolutely being followed. So all of the fee adjustments here reflect actually in all cases, deficits that programs are facing, and that this is a way to address those deficits. With respect to reversion to the general fund, it is not written explicitly. There are exceptions to that rule where, for instance, monies stay in a certain special fund if they're collected, like going into the state revolving loan fund, or revert back to certain funds where that money is given back out to the residents of the state or businesses of the state for certain benefits.
Yeah, the idea is that we don't want the money sitting idle and doing nothing when, especially in times like we have now, when there's such strain on the overall budget of the state.
That's right.
Would you object to having some more tightening language put into this bill along those lines that we just discussed?
Well, I think we would need to look through, because there are some instances in this bill where the monies don't actually go back to the general fund. So if you were to change that to say you would take that they're going into those types of special funds that help, none of these special funds are carrying heavy surpluses.
Okay,
So
thank you.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Delegate Foley.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to the MDE for bringing this bill. I think I really commend you for the work that you've done on this and the fact that you undertook this. I hope that this is a model for other departments to follow your lead, bring in the stakeholders. I do appreciate, as Delegate Jacobs said, that you briefed us on this bill. I think all of that is very helpful and just a kind of a model of problem solving. So congratulations on that. I have two questions. My first question is, can you this may be hard to answer because it may not be the same across the board, but can you give us an idea of when the last time these fees and fines were increased?
So it varies greatly. Some of them go back literally multiple decades. So for example, the wetlands and waterways were last adjusted to CPI in 2012, and we're just adjusting them forward. There are some others, though, that have not been adjusted in much longer time periods than that.
So it's a pretty long time. It's safe to say that it's a pretty long time, sometimes in some cases decades, that these fees have not been increased, right? I mean, it
The
seems
minimum
like
is 10 years.
10 years,
Yeah.
minimum of 10 years.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is, you mentioned, Les, about the some of the amendments that you were working on, willing to accept. I noticed that I don't think I heard you say anything about the River Keepers Amendment. And I know we'll probably hear from them, but I just wanted to know if you were amenable to that amendment, which increases the maximum administrative fine for water pollution control violations.
So we did not necessarily see every single amendment that's proposed. I got some of this testimony just recent, like literally a few minutes before this hearing. We'll certainly consider that. I would say broadly that there does need to be, I think, a holistic look at fines, penalties, and across the board with that. So certainly we would want to consider that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because I do think that increasing fines and penalties, as you say, is very defendable when you're looking at a bill like this. But thank you for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Foley. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. I think most, if not all of these fee increases are long overdue. So thank you for taking this on. I'm just curious, this is somewhat hypothetical, but it is a fact that I have a bill in drafting to address coal ash. And I've had conversations with MDE representatives, several conversations, including with Mr. Knapp about a week ago. And I do intend to include in that a more robust fee for industry going forward. So how, I'm wondering how that could work if, and I know you haven't seen that yet. I've kind of described it, but you haven't seen it on paper. How would we deal with that if, conceptually, if the fee I'm proposing is more robust than what you're proposing?
So I'll open and then turn it over to our Land and Materials Director, Tyler Abbott here. But the challenge we have is that right now for coal combustion byproducts, fly ash, boiler slag, et cetera, the amount of money we collect is based on actual production.
Mhm.
Right now, because we have slowly been phasing out those types of productions, coal plants are going offline. We are rapidly coming to the point where I believe there are 2 facilities left and they're both slated for closure for using coal. That means that our revenue source will come down to 0.
Right.
So we need to change how we collect the money and do that. I'm not sure, having not seen your specific language yet, how that might interact, but do you want to add anything else?
So Mr. Knapp, my bill, and Mr. Abbott, my bill does anticipate that. We understand the issue with it, the fees being based historically on those operations while they're operating, then that those end when they close. But based on the conversations we've had, with my office and your agency, my premise is that the polluter should pay going forward, even after they've closed, because this contamination will be with us for decades. So, there's that well-established standard in federal law with Superfund that the polluter continues to pay for years to come. And I'm prepared to make that case, but we do understand that as it's currently structured, it's going to come to an end, so that the fee would have to be restructured completely.
Sure. So just to put a little more context in what our fee does. And so this proposed change to the fee will bill for what is currently in the ground. And so, that is providing that incentive so that those who are currently regulated, those who are paying that fee, would have that incentive to get it out of the ground so they're no longer paying a fee. As we expand our regulatory environment and as we see these different federal changes, there'll be changes to that program. And if we see additional costs, those will be passed on to those who are owning closed CCB landfills. And sorry, for the record, Tyler Abbott, Director of Land and Materials Administration, or MDE.
Yeah, and one quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. Does this change in the fee, your proposed change, anticipate possible sales of those properties, and what would happen then if there's a new owner?
So it would be billed to the owner of the facility. So if there was a sale and if there was a transfer, that new owner would still be liable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Terrassa.
Am I on? Oh, very briefly. I did find the reference that I was talking about. It has to do with the application fees and says the following. This is page 14, line 17 through 19. It starts on line 4. The following are exempt from application fees established under paragraph 1 of the subsection. So it may be that there are other fees, but if you could just take a look at that, and I appreciate all of our discussions about many things recently. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, but I'm happy to talk about it offline.
I did. I was just texting back and forth with my program manager.
Oh, okay.
And stream restoration and living shorelines, for example, are both exempt from for fees, for application fees.
Okay, and I guess I wonder if I support this bill. I think this is great that you're doing this. I'm just wondering if you would consider looking at the stream restoration, because some of the conversation has been about needing to do more monitoring. So that's, isn't that so that I'm asking that question? Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any other questions for this panel. We do have some in-person favorable testimony. Call up Matt Stegman, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Elizabeth Bingham, Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, and Kim Coble from the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. And the second one of you sits down, please just get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Kim Coble, Executive Director of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. I think MDE has done an excellent job of talking about the importance of their work and the need to fund it. We're here in complete support of that bill, and would hope there'd be a positive passage of it.
I'm Beth Bingham. Thank you so much for allowing us to speak today. I'm with the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, and our organization has been at the forefront of lead poisoning prevention work here in Maryland for the past 3 decades. And we strongly support the provisions in this bill that'll increase resources for lead poisoning prevention programs and for staffing at MDE, so we can have stronger enforcement of the Maryland lead law. And just for some perspective, in 2021, there were more than 1,400 kids in Maryland with elevated blood lead levels. And that number is likely to go up by probably about another 1,000 because of the new lead action level that just went into effect January 1st. It went down from 5 micrograms per deciliter to 3.5 micrograms per deciliter. So that will raise the number of children who are considered lead poison. So MDE needs the additional revenue generated by the provisions in this bill to ensure they have the personnel to complete inspections and improve compliance and oversight and enforcement capacity. And the funding is imperative for the state to be able to continue to remediate lead hazards in the significant number of older homes we have in the state. And importantly, as the secretary said, expanding staffing capacity to respond to homes where children with elevated blood lead levels have been identified. And again, there will be significantly more because of the lowered action level. And then lastly, the increased revenue for MDE will enable them to appropriately fund some really vital programs. After 24 years, MDE funding for lead poisoning prevention program services ceased in July 2021, despite a statutory requirement that at least $750,000 from the state lead poisoning prevention fund be spent annually on outreach and education programs and enforcement. It supports things like tenants' rights assistance, case management, legal services, and education throughout the state about lead poisoning prevention. And while many folks may think that lead poisoning is not a thing, it still is. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Corman, Vice Chairman Boyce, members of the committee, Matt Stegman from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. As we testified to this committee earlier this afternoon, a lot of the progress that we've made in Maryland environmentally is very fragile and requires a sustained investment. This bill allows MDE the capacity to sustain their investment in a number of programs that do have significant impacts on water quality in the state. And
makes those programs sustainable for the future. And for that reason, we urge the committee's favorable report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this panel? I do not see any, so thank you all for your testimony. We do have some in-person favorable with amendment testimony. We have Grayson Wiggins representing MMHA and Robert Enton, who may be outside representing the Maryland, oh, he's back in, great, Maryland Building Industry Association. Let's go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Robert Enton on behalf of the Maryland Building Industry Association. We have been in discussions with the department, and I think in the amendments that you have from the department, you will see that for the registration fees for septic tanks, if the state takes this over from the county, will be capped at $575 with a maximum increase of 3% based upon the CPI. And with those amendments, we have no problem with the bill.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Grayson Wiggins here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. We have an amendment. It's articulated in our written testimony. It is on page 29, and it concerns the increase in fees on properties that are subject to the lead paint program at MDE. We heard yesterday, we spent a lot of time talking about the shortage of affordable housing in the state of Maryland as part of a larger discussion as we look at multiple bills this year that seek to raise fees on housing providers. I'm here just to remind the committee that fees play a part in the price of housing. We have, in addition to property taxes, which are paid at a high rate at both the local and state level, you have fees for things like inspections, licensing. And so as we look and we consider whether we're going to raise these fees and how we're going to do it, it's just important to remember the impact on the cost of housing. Additionally, I want to note that we certainly appreciate the program. We think the intent is laudable. We would respectfully request that the committee look at funding this through the general fund or through another mechanism in the budget that doesn't increase the fees on these properties, which were built before 1978 and which are primarily naturally occurring affordable housing. Hey, happy to take any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Boyce.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Mr. Wiggins, can you tell me, given that the department testified that a lot of these fees have not been increased for decades, can you talk about what increase is acceptable? Because there will be an increase. What is acceptable to your organization? Because I mean, yes, increase is going to hurt housing, but I don't see how. $30 to $60, $10 to $50 ends up hurting the tenant at the bottom for a bottom line. So what is essentially acceptable, because the fees will be increased? I don't think they won't be increased.
Thank you for the question, Delegate Boyce. As far as a specific number, I have to go back to my client and get an answer on that. But I think to your point, I don't know when this fee was last increased specifically. I unfortunately was testifying in another committee, didn't hear all of the department's testimony. But someone mentioned, I believe, that it was attached, or they went and looked back at the CPI and tried to calculate it that way. Doubling the fee, I'm not sure that the CPI doubled in the last 10 years. So I'd have to look at the math on that. But again, it's not just this fee. There are other fees and other bills that are going to be considered by the committee this year that also increase fees. So we just wanted to be here at the table today to talk about how, or just to help inform the committee that there are a number of bills that may increase fees, and collectively, those certainly do impact the price of housing.
But respectfully, lead is still an issue.
Yes, 100%. And we 100% agree with that. And so to your point, if this is a public issue, which we think it is, and we think it's a laudable program, let's fund it in the general fund. Let's find funding that's stable in the general fund and isn't dependent upon the number of registered units.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you each for your testimony. I believe that concludes the bill hearing on HB 245. We'll now turn to the Department of Natural Resources, HB 45. Come back to the Department of Natural Resources.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to see you all this afternoon. For the record, I'm Josh Kurtz, the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. I'm joined today by Assistant Secretary for Land Resources, Paul Pedito, in support of HB 345. First, I'd like to extend an invitation to all of you to come visit the taxidermy vault that we have at the Department of Natural Resources in our basement. And that giant warehouse of stuffed animals is the reason that we have this bill before you today. Every year, the department receives numerous requests from individuals trying to dispose of taxidermy mounts from deceased relatives. And they're not able to sell those within the estate sales and things like that. So the only option is to donate them or to get very angry at the department for not allowing them to be sold and drop them off at our front door. So this bill would allow for legally acquired mounted specimens to be sold if the original owner is deceased and the specimen is part of the individual's estate. So we're not looking to allow people to sell endangered species or things that were harvested illegally, but things that can be proven to have been harvested and stuffed within, the bounds of what is acceptable and legal would be what we'd be looking for. Currently, neighboring states like Pennsylvania and West Virginia do permit the sale of certain mounts. And due to this, I would respectfully request a favorable report on HB 345.
Are there any questions about the stuffed animal vaults? Delegate Healy.
Curious, are there any museums or natural history museums or places like that would display some of these?
Yeah, we've had conversations with some. I know there's several around the state, including Frostburg University that has one. But I think really what we're seeing is native species, which isn't really being sought after. Kind of everybody has a white-tailed deer, but everybody has a white-tailed deer they're trying to get rid of too. So I think that's really what we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Delegate Healy, I will also say, if you want to see an awesome collection, check out the Maryland Natural History Society in District 8. I also know some of these older taxidermy animals and perhaps even newer ones. I know a lot of them were preserved using poisons such as arsenic. Is there any restrictions on what you can and cannot accept based on how things were preserved?
Okay. Yeah, so thanks for the question, Delegate. So the good news is most of those older mounts that used arsenic and formaldehyde in its sort of earlier days, they had about a 20-year lifespan. So generally what we see, and the secretary's right, they literally show up at 580 Talls with them, 580 Raoul Boulevard with them. And my experience in the last 30 years is mostly what we're looking at is well-preserved mounts that were tanned properly and have been properly harvested and tagged. And we're fortunate that our data collection system allows us to flash back that and confirm that those were legally harvested. So
great, thank you.
Appreciate the question.
Thank you, Delegate Allen. Are there any other Delegate Jacobs?
I think he may have asked a similar question. I was just wondering if had to provide any documentation from the estate, or you can just tell by the tanning process or whatever.
Yeah,
because I mean, most people don't have documentation.
So the good news is that we transitioned about a decade ago to the electronic check-in system that I know you're familiar with, Delegate. And prior to that, our data were all digitized. So if someone says I'm the personal representative of Estate X and I have these two white-tailed deer, there's a certain amount of trust that has to go into the system because we don't know exactly what 8-point deer that is, but we have an expectation that we can. They will have a tag, or they will have the decedent's information that we can match to our database and say, yes, that's likely the animal and it's fine to go ahead and sell it.
All right, thank you.
Great. I do not see any other questions, but Mr. Secretary, don't go far. That ends the bill hearing on HB 45, and we will transition to HB 109. Once again, Department of Natural Resources. And if the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is with you, they can just come on up right now. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Josh Kurtz, the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. I'm joined by my colleague Becky Golden, who's an SAV expert for the department to answer any technical questions. And we're here in support of HB 109. And this bill really is rooted in the understanding and recognizing the importance of the role that SAV plays in the bay restoration. So SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation. They provide critical habitat and food for recreationally and commercially important species like blue crabs, fish, and waterfowl. They also add oxygen to the water and process nutrients, sequester carbon, they trap sediments, they reduce erosion. They do a wide range of things that helps us restore the bay and really target the living resource. While we have made really good progress on this, we're only at about 33% of the historic levels in the bay proper and 24% in the coastal bays. And so this legislation will make necessary upgrades to DNR's SAV statute to ensure that this remains, a top priority for bay restoration. And so what does this bill do? This legislation lowers the width requirement from 60 feet to 20 feet for which SAV can be removed without approval from the department for boating purposes and by utility companies. This allows us to better align with boating access and navigation practices. This legislation will require, rather than encourage individuals to contact the department prior to SAV alterations, who are doing this for those boating or utility concerns. So right now, the statute says that we encourage you to let us know. This would require you to let us know. Just to allow us to be able to track and monitor the changes in SAV. This will allow us to really harness that better data across both the coastal bays and the Chesapeake Bay proper. Another piece of this bill is that it includes the coastal bays within some of the exemptions that are currently offered in the Chesapeake, but not in the coastal bays. Lastly, the bill updates language around exemptions for boating access, SAV removal to reflect current practices. And changes languages to cut and trim up as opposed to harvest or eradicate. This bill is important for us to continue to monitor and protect SAV. And with that, I respectfully request a favorable report on the bill. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Is the Chesapeake Bay Foundation? Go ahead.
Hello, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. My name is Gussie McGuire. I'm a Maryland staff scientist at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We support House Bill 109 for essentially all the reasons that have already been discussed. Moving from harvesting, removing, using that language to talk about trimming. When you trim the grasses, it does allow them to come back from the roots and preserves the root system that helps with carbon sequestration. We just did want to point out that there are still exemptions for holders of discharge permits and publicly and privately owned sewage treatment plants. They remain exempt from the requirements to consult with DNR prior to the SAV trimming and removal. We're not saying that needs to be changed at this time, just pointing out that there is a possibility for SAV removal to occur without the oversight of DNR. So we do urge the favorable report on HB 109. Thanks so much.
I see we have at least one question, Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does this bill cover invasive aquatic species as well?
Yes, it does. So it covers any species that's present within the bay at this time, regardless of whether it's native or non-native.
So maybe I don't understand the bill, but are you saying then you can't remove if there's an invasive aquatic species of plant, you can't remove that, you can just trim it? Is that what the bill?
No, it's saying that if you would like to remove it, then the department is requesting that information and that we would authorize the best management practices for how you would go about removing that infestation.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on HB 109. We'll now turn, don't go anywhere, Mr. Secretary, to HB 117, DNR, Maryland Geological Survey Fund Establishment.
Excellent. Good afternoon again, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Josh Kurtz, the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. I'm joined today by Rich Hort, who's the Director of DNR's Resource Assessment Service, and the Maryland Geological Survey sits within that unit of the department. This bill is a technical bill which creates a special fund for the Maryland Geological Survey. This is important to provide flexibility and additional transparency to the accounting of the Geologic Survey. Additionally, within our agency, we're primarily composed of special funds, and MGS is one of the only entities at DNR that does not have a special fund. Currently, the survey charges overhead to local governments, nonprofits, and other entities when we do work. And that revenue does not have a designated place within the department, so it goes into a catch-all budget that is managed by the department. This creates a bit of an inefficient process. It does not provide for the clearest of accounting for the public. It also then does not allow us to accrue interest like a special fund would, or to think about kind of long-term preservation of these funds. One thing that I think is important, and Chair Corman, we discussed before, so this fund could, after 1 year, roll back over into the general fund. We're currently spending that down every year within 2 years of that. But what we want to be able to do is think a little bit more long-term and start savings for some of our really expensive pieces of equipment that the survey does maintain and utilize for the state. I think one thing that we're doing right now is actually the Bay Bottom survey, incredibly technologically advanced pieces of equipment that MGS is required to maintain. So again, this provides us additional flexibility to manage those funds and also a more transparent accounting. And with that, I respectfully request a favorable report on the bill on HB 117. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this bill? I do not see any. That ends the bill hearing on HB 117. Mr. Secretary, you're on a roll. HB 237. Commercial Northern Snakehead License.
All right.
I wish you good luck. Go ahead.
I think I missed that bill here, unfortunately. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Josh Kurtz, Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources, and I'm joined today by the Associate Director of the Fishing and Boating Services, Sarah Widman, to discuss HB 237. This is a technical bill that gives the department the regulatory authority around the use of gear as it relates to the commercial northern snakehead and the licenses thereunder. So currently, and really this is a relatively new license for the department. It was established in 2016. And it allows the licensee to catch snakeheads for sale using a bow and arrow attached to a retrieval line or a hook line. Currently, under law, the licensee is prohibited from fishing with a bow and arrow within 100 yards of another person or vessel, a public or private swimming area, a diver down flag, or an occupied offshore stationary blind. This is an incredibly popular license within the department, but it's led to conflicts, and notably those are between licensees fishing at night and the bright lights they use and nearby dwellings. So once this was brought to the attention of the department, we went through a scoping and public discourse, and we drafted regulations to address both sides' concerns, which we are ready to propose. However, if the agency implemented those without changing the statute to refer to the agency's regulations, then this group of licensees would not be required to follow the new safety regulations. And so the regulations we would like to adopt would add residences to the safety zone for projectile gears and reduce that safety zone from 100 to 50 yards and establish the length of retrieval lines, which may not exceed 35 yards. So this legislation would allow us to adopt and continue to use or change those regulations through the public scoping process, and would require the license holders to then follow those regulations of the department. There's a vast number of licensees out there, and I think we have seen many of these, especially with dwellings, negative interactions, which is what we're really trying to address with this legislation. With that, I respectfully request a favorable report on the bill, and Sarah and I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
I think to me, that's Professor Widman. I think you were my fisheries professor at University of Maryland.
Yes, I was, Chairman.
All right. So, all right. 15 years ago, I had a feeling I might end up here. So any questions on this piece of legislation? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on HB 237 and our bill hearings for this afternoon. Any subcommittee announcements? Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is now 3:46. So the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee will meet. I had to make a correction here. I said on the floor, we will meet digitally. We will meet virtually instead of digitally at 4 o'clock, Mr. Chair.
No, meet digitally. I want to see.
I do not see any other subcommittee announcements. So with that, we are adjourned for the afternoon. Thank you, colleagues.